Welcome to Cults and the Culting of America podcast. My name is Scot Loyd, along with my friend Daniella Mestyanek Young, or the Knitting Cult Lady. Daniella, good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Scott. I'm excited about this episode.
Absolutely, and we're going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. But if you've seen the documentary, I always get the name wrong. Happy Shiny People or something of that nature. Tara and Floyd are with us tonight, and we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and tell us about that connection. First of all, I'm sure I got the name of the documentary wrong.
No, Shiny Happy People. You got it.
Okay, I think I said Happy Shiny People, but Shiny Happy People. I got you. Okay.
No joke. That's the way our son has said it for a couple of years, so I probably didn't even hear it. You see hearing it that way.
Oh, well, it's an honor to have you both. So tell us a little bit about yourselves and your story and how you ended up in that documentary.
Oh my gosh. Well, my name is Tara, and this is my husband, Floyd.
Hello.
We have been married. This year is going to be 20 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's a miracle.
Yes, it is. And we were both homeschooled our entire lives.
Well, you were homeschooled. I was basically just homed.
That's the ongoing joke. And our lives were both deeply impacted by Bill Gothard and IBLP. Floyd was raised in it. His family kind of accepted everything Bill Gothard had to say, hook, line, and sinker. Oh, yeah. They signed up for ATI, which was a homeschool group through IBLP, whereas my family pretty much used the curriculum that Bill Gothard had to offer, the wisdom booklets, the character sketchbooks. We had several of the games. I went to a couple of children's institutes and attended conferences. But Floyd's family really just kind of
hook, line, and sinker. We were blue and white, IBLP / ATI all the way.
Yes.
And just for our listeners, you threw out a lot of letters there. Why don't we unpack what each one of those means?
Absolutely.
So IBLP, and I've had to do this for strangers in Knoxville, Tennessee during that was their largest homeschool conference every year.
It was hosted in...
We took over the University of Tennessee campus, and people would be like, what the heck are you guys? And I would hold up my little bag that had the logo on it. It said, we're the Institute in Basic Life Principles. And if you asked me any more than that, I would probably freeze.
Yes.
I had that on the bag. I could read that out.
Bill Gothard was a sucker for an acronym.
We loved acronyms.
Yes.
And ATI stands for the Advanced Training Institute, which was the moniker for their homeschool program. So IBLP was the basically the head organization, and they had all these little programs under the IBLP umbrella. ATI was the homeschool version of that.
Yes. In order to join ATI, you had to sign a contract with IBLP where you would give up having a television in your home. You would commit to living your lives specifically the way that Bill Gothard wanted,
their principles.
By their principles.
Secular music, homeschool your children. It was a whole thing. He also loved contracts. I signed a lot of contracts too.
Yeah. And Floyd, you mentioned an umbrella. And speaking of umbrellas, I think most people would recognize Gothard's teaching from that meme, that chart that probably a lot of us are familiar with, where you have the umbrella, who is, I'll get this wrong, but it was God. And then under that was the dad, and like a hierarchy, protecting one another.
I think it was Gothard, and then the dad. we would joke with that. But yeah, the umbrella of authority. And to this day, umbrella is kind of a trigger word for me. I have sensory issues. I hate being wet, but I don't use an umbrella.
You maybe will be happy to know that in my musical, there's going to be a Bill Gothard character, and at some point he's going to do a little singing in the rain bit.
That is brilliant.
All right.
That is brilliant. Sign me up for row 1.
You'll be in the splash zone.
Yeah.
Okay, first question I want to ask you. So first of all, I just want to say it sounds exactly like my life in the bona fide Children of God cult, right? We were
Okay.
basically unschooled until they adopted different homeschooling programs.
Yep.
Television, right? The first time I saw television on live was on 9/11 when I was 14.
Yeah.
Completely
Good.
cut off. Also, lots of contracts. Cults love a contract.
Oh,
They
yeah.
do.
So how do you feel about people calling ILBP a cult or homeschooling a cult, which sometimes also gets called?
I mean, that is definitely, I will say that of the entire cast of Shiny Happy People, I was probably not as far along in my deconstruction as everyone else.
Yeah.
So filming for the documentary made my delightful little stroll down deconstruction go,
Free fall.
yeah, I was free falling into it. And I bring that up just to say, in answer to your question, that was so hard. And it was incredibly,
that was a hard one for you to swallow.
It was very hard for me to swallow, but I have like my journals from that time frame where like I went through, researching what makes a cult. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, the Western church, Western theology can fall underneath that category. So it was something that I couldn't really argue with anymore, especially when you acknowledge just how deeply Christian fundamentalism,
lines up with that.
Yeah.
Well, and for me, my deconstruction process started kind of in secret. I had a 2-hour commute, and I spent a lot of time listening to YouTube and podcasts and starting to soak in information that had been deprived to me in my childhood and I had ignored in my young adulthood. And just on a whim, I had clicked into a video that I was listening to, and the guy, I think he was talking about some other group,
Christian,
yeah, I think Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or something like that. And he's like, well, what is a cult? And he lists off the 14 characteristics. I forget who, but some professor had come up with these quantifiable terms of what a cult is, and to meet that criteria, you had to have at least 10 of the 14. And by 13, I had checked all of the ones off on my childhood, and that's when I stopped saying quasi-cult and just started calling it a cult.
For years, he just said, oh, yeah, I was raised in a quasi-cult, blah, blah, just making...
Light.
Yeah, and then he came home from, listening to this, and he's like, I think it might have actually been a cult. It was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And, this is what I really hoped to do with my book and even with my social media channels, which is that, like, I have spent 20 years now in the US being told that like my life in a cult was so impossible to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But then I meet people like you and people like Scot who grew up in these like ordinary Christian groups in America.
Yes.
And I'm like, no, but I recognize what you're going through. And honestly, now I have this theory that if you say like, I grew up in, and then the next words are not geographical information. Like,
wow,
you have
that's
deconstructing
really
to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow.
Well, my first experience with Gothard's material came later in my life. And as Daniella mentioned, I grew up in an obscure Pentecostal cult, the United Pentecostal Church, which was very similar. Dress codes for women, prohibitions on television, entertainment, things of that nature. And when I went to my organization's Bible school, so I graduated from public high school, and then I went to a Bible school that they sponsored. It was there that Gothard's basic life principles were introduced to us. And we were, especially as young men, right? We were taught to embrace this idea of a complementarian relationship, although they didn't necessarily use that language back then. This would have been the 80s and 90s. But the idea that men are responsible for their home, they're responsible for leading their wives and their children. And then also I do recall a lot of Gothard's teaching had to do with finances and debt and things of that nature as well. That was a big deal when I was learning of all of that for us young men. And I think it goes to the heart of what a cult does, right? A cult as Daniella has rightfully pointed out, is about exploiting labor, free labor. And so a part of that, right, is learning, teaching people how to manage their finances so that then they can give more or all to the group.
Yep. Because you'll end up with more the more you give, right? You're going to get the blessings that's going to just pour into your household. And oh my gosh, I remember subscribing to that so heavily and just really looking for the signs that meant that 10% was really coming back tenfold into my household. So
she never did.
Yeah.
The promise Honestly, of the cult is always a lie.
What'd you say, Sweet Pea?
I just said the promise of the cult is always a lie.
It is. What's crazy to me too is on this side, like where we're at in our deconstruction now, I hate using the word blessed, but I've never felt more like I've never felt more blessed. I've never felt like just without even searching for it. It just
profound sense of gratitude for the life that we have. For no other reason than having it.
Yeah. Today I stood outside and it was a blue sky with no clouds, and I literally just was like feeling the sun, and I spun in a circle, and it was like stupid and cliche, but it would just felt so good to be joyful and not have to owe it to something or someone or feel bad for feeling good. It was just
you just were.
I just was, and it was good.
And that's beautiful. That's a beautiful expression of what it looks on the other side. And so, Floyd, you mentioned that you started listening to podcasts, other things, and it sort of dawned on you that hey, we're in a cult.
Right.
Tara, were you already there, or did it take some time for both of you to get on the same page? And what did that look like?
Oh my gosh, the fact that we're sitting here together never ceases to amaze me, just because we weren't on the same deconstruction timeline.
When I said I kind of did it in secret, there was a reason.
Yeah. We, when we got married, both of us we were no longer within like the constructs of IBLP, but we were still very heavily involved with Christian fundamentalism.
That was the only worldview we had ever known.
Right.
So we naturally continued that into our young adulthood and marriage.
And our plan was to, be fruitful and multiply. I wanted to have 5 kids. I wanted to homeschool them. I wanted to raise them the way that I had been raised, because I just thought that it was
the right way.
Right. The right way. And so Floyd really, from when I first met him, he was struggling with the concept of his faith and just religion as a whole. And when we came together, we kind of healed each other in a way, and we were kind of able to put a Band-Aid over it. And what would then transpire over the next decade would be Floyd really searching for answers and trying to rationalize what we were believing.
And a lot of it was just numbing. There was so much stress, strain, and frankly cognitive dissonance that you have to maintain to live in a fundamentalist worldview. And there were core aspects of Christianity and fundamentalism that I was never able to fully rectify. When I met Tara, I was deeply, I believed in God, but I believed that God was cruel and capricious and
angry.
I was a little bitter, and the first literal ray of sunshine into my life softened that up a little bit. But those doubts and that nagging thing at the back of my head that said there's something not right about this never went away. And it took a great deal of effort. I had books on creationism and to explain away science and reality, because you have to abandon reality in order to fully subscribe to this fundamentalism. And that was just objective reality. Then there's all of the morality that the idea of eternal conscious torment never sat well with me. And
weird.
Yeah. And so for over a decade, I struggled with that, and poorly, mostly with numbing. And eventually it got to a point
and
where...
by numbing, we mean that he's been sober for almost 10 years now.
Yeah.
So...
And married for 20.
Yes,
Yeah.
For 20. Yeah. And that was a huge part of just his survival mechanism, because I
didn't have any coping skills.
Right.
That's one of the things that is stripped from you. And
I mean, to put it as succinctly as possible, we both were on very different journeys at very different times, and I was so close to my family, and I would say that my upbringing, as many people's upbringing, I couldn't imagine a world where I would survive without them. And so if they believed this way, like, there was never a question in my mind. And ultimately, he was, further on in our marriage, he was kind of on this secret journey of deconstruction without the use of numbing. And he was genuinely researching. And we have one child, his name is Walter, and he's autistic. And that autism brought in a whole realm of not being able to parent the way that I had been parented. So that automatically made it so that I had to try to adapt and change things. And he was really struggling, and just behaviorally, Walter was with just anger and, being a kid, but also handling autism. And I realized one day, I'm like, why is he getting in trouble? Well, he's getting in trouble because being angry is bad. Because when he's getting mad, he's getting a consequence, because mad is bad. And that's me.
Feelings are bad.
Feelings are bad. And I realized I have to, I didn't know how to explore it, but I had to explore. I had to kind of delve into this and figure out, are these feelings that God made us with really so bad? And that was the thread for me.
That was the wedge.
Yeah. I truly could not, I had to examine it.
Yeah.
There was around this same time frame, he had been misbehaving, and I remember thinking, okay, he's old enough and comprehends enough that I can sit him down and say, Walter, what you're doing is sinning, and this goes against God, because you're disobeying, and you're, all these things and these concepts that I was raised with. Mm-hmm. And I sat him down, and I was going to try to have this conversation, and I looked into this beautiful human's eyes, and I was like, how on earth am I supposed to tell this human that is just experiencing these feelings that he's going to go to hell because he's doing something? Like, I just
couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So that's how my deconstruction started. And then we kind of somewhere in there.
So, well, I love this story because it's funny now. She had brain surgery in Houston, Texas, and we were driving home, and she was in a wheelchair, and we stopped at a museum that was open. It was free that day, and we wheeled through it. And I am secretly now believing in evolution, and my mind is open to all of these things that were closed off. And we rolled through this museum, and we went through the natural history exhibit. And on the way home, she said something that made me think it was okay to say, man, it's really cool to not have to believe that the Bible is literally true. And that is not what she meant. So I accidentally outed myself, and a very tense conversation later.
I mean, and honestly, it's so terrible, because in that time frame, I'm like worried for his soul. I'm worried, like, what on earth is going to happen? And I'm worried if my family finds out.
Yeah.
Like, we've made it through, substance abuse. We've made it through, like, being homeless as a result of substance abuse. We've made it through all these things that, like, my family didn't disown us over. And now
this will be the struggle.
Oh my God, I could never tell my father that my husband believes that evolution is real. Like, dear God up above, that would be a complete deal breaker.
And to this,
and that sounds ridiculous, but that's how we were all raised. Like, that's Absolutely. The worst of the worst, right? It's none of the other. It's denying what the Bible says, or saying it's not true, or evolving in your faith.
It would have been better off for me to say that, like, Floyd had committed some sort of terrible
murdered someone,
and that would have been a better off. I think they could have forgiven him and moved on and like figured that out. But to say, oh my God,
to say Ken Ham is wrong is tantamount to being excommunicated.
Yeah.
And so we got through that, and it took a little time, but as I explained the things that I had learned, she's started to see it, and we came to be pretty much on the same page.
And what is very painful for me is that while I was understanding and like trying to be as loving to him as I possibly could while still trying to poke holes in everything that he's telling me, I was so fear-filled that I wasn't a supportive like human to him. I was a Christian fundamental wife to him, going, oh my God, what are you doing? And when I went through my deconstruction, I got to like have this man hold me and hug me and love on me and be like, yeah, we don't know what the answers are. Whereas, and it's okay. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could have done the same thing for you, but here we are.
It all worked out.
Yes.
I'm sure you know that it is rather rare for a couple who got together in their cult to come through it and still be, you know, so seemingly strong, especially on the outside. And that was beautiful what you said, but I love that Floyd went through it first and was then able to like help you through your journey. You know, I had a deconstruction, but it was more of like patriarchy and misogyny and kind of everything at once. Meanwhile, my husband is still in the military. And I remember he said to me at one point, he said, you know, it feels like you're changing a lot and you're leaving me behind.
Yep.
And I said to him, you know, babe, I read 60 books a year and every one of them changes me. And I left a whole cult that wouldn't let me leave. And like, I challenge you to keep up with me on this journey. And at some point when I'm saying to people, I'm like, at some point our relationship was tense. And then at some point we just kind of committed that we were going to be on this journey with each other.
Yes.
And we both know. And it's funny because now he's 4 years out of the military. So he's the one changing so much. Right. And I'm here just like, it's going to be cool to see who you are.
Yes. Yeah. No, there was this like kind of, it wasn't necessarily something that was verbalized between us, but it was just this like, I've got you. Like, we're in this now.
We'd already gone through the worst that you could. It was hard, but it wasn't the worst. We got through it.
And I will say that when he accidentally outed himself and I'm having these conversations with him and I'm looking in his eyes and I'm like, well, crap, I see peace and love and just gratitude in his eyes that I have not seen in the turmoil and the lack of coping skills over the course of our marriage. How can you argue with that? I can't argue with that.
20-year first.
That's a beautiful story. It really is. And Floyd, congratulations on your sobriety. And you mentioned that. And so I'm wondering, was that numbing process, you know, a lot of people describe it as a necessary pendulum swing when you leave these high control groups. I know for me, you know, there was a lot of activities. We'll just leave it at that, you know, hey, I'm going to engage in all of this now because I was denied it in my youth. And so you sort of swing the other way. Was that part of what you were experiencing? Because I know I grew up in a home that, you know, alcohol was forbidden, as was everything that, you know, was fun.
Right.
I will say this. I'm a pretty boring person. I didn't really get a party phase, and I don't think for me, it wasn't about the fun. It was 100% about not feeling the way that I felt when I was sober, which was freaking miserable. And the minute that I started to put down the baggage of garbage that I had been taught, and I no longer felt compelled to carry all of that need to numb. Not virtually, it virtually disappeared. I mean, stress is still a big trigger for me.
But there's different coping, there's
I can cope with that now.
Yeah.
It's not all consuming.
And there's a certain amount of, when you put down that baggage, you're putting down the shame. And you're able to get, exactly what I was saying in regards to my son, figuring out that these feelings aren't the enemy, and that, getting in touch with yourself, this isn't, there's gonna be more healing on the other side of it than ignoring it and trying to just.
And it's okay to feel bad.
Yeah.
I mean, for especially rebuilding our relationship, one of the things I had to learn was it's okay if she's upset. Like I'm going to do something rude or stupid,
not thinking,
or not do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And she'll feel some sort of way about it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And prior to all this, that was something I was not able to cope with. So
this is even something that I really recently learned about trauma, and especially about CPTSD, right? So I think of like my husband, who has your classic, typical PTSD from being at war, right? He's the kind of veteran that doesn't appreciate fireworks, etc. Right? There's specific, right? It makes him think of specific trauma, being shot at while flying at war. But for me, someone who has CPTSD, it's like you don't even know what your triggers are. But knowing that is so helpful.
Yes.
Anytime I just find myself just like irritated, I'm being snippy with my husband or my kid, or and then it's just like, okay, this is not me. There's nothing wrong with me. But also like you said, right? Like these negative feelings are okay.
Yes.
And actually, I have soon, I've written a children's book. And it's called Mommy, I Lost My Smile. And it's for children dealing with grief and trauma.
That is so perfect.
That's phenomenal.
Literally, every time I would talk about it or read it or anything, I would start choking up. Wow. And that was when I realized, I was like, oh, this book is as much for me and the rest of us first generation parents, I call us.
Yes.
That we're never taught that our emotions were safe.
Yep.
And there's this one line at the end where she says, my smile is mine and so is my frown. And I love that, right? Because we weren't in the Children of God cult. Like if you were upset, you had the demons of depression and you were down in the dumps with the devil. And how dare you?
Absolutely. You're no longer being a light in the world. You're no longer showing the goodness of God. If you're upset or angry or, you've got an attitude.
You have to be a good witness.
You have to bear witness and be the light on the hill and all of the things.
But that Old Testament God was very angry, right?
Yes.
Well, I've been back editing my chapter on self-sacrifice, which for listeners, you can go back and check our episode 4 or 5 about self-sacrifice. And, what's really important is that all of this stuff, the emotional suppression, the attitude control, all of it is about breaking you. That's the point, right? Like cults have to separate you from your individual identity, or if you're being raised in it, they have to, make it so that you don't develop an individual identity. And I just love it that it was like a moment of you basically being told by your religion to quash your own child's individuality, that you were like, I'm not going to do this.
I couldn't do it. And it begged the question, why could my parents do it? Like it was, and it falls right in line with what you're saying in the sense of it's for control, and it makes you so much easier to handle, right? Because if we look at it just from a parental perspective, if my child is never upset or angry, that's a really easy kid. That's someone that you can control, and it makes your life so much easier. And that's really what it it boils down to even there for the parents. I will have good little pod children that behave, make me look good, and make my life easier.
I vividly remember once we participated in a weekly Bible study with much more liberal people than us, and my mom getting into an argument with one of the ladies that ran the thing, who her child was a couple years older than me. He was a teenager, and she's like, "Oh, teenagers will be teenagers. They're gonna be rebellious." And my mom got mad at her and she says, "No, they will not. You raise them the right way. Raise up a child in the way they should go." And hate to break it to you, Mom, but all of her kids were a little rebellious.
I'm also going to have a line in my musical where she goes, "I am what I am because you trained me." And then the chorus is going to say, "Aren't these the fruits that you've been raising up so well?"
Oh, man.
Oh, my gosh. Front row, right? I get front row. I've claimed
Yes. Dibs.
Oh, I was literally procrastinating something like 2 weekends ago, and then I just wrote an entire musical concept for Uncultured, the Cult Baby musical. So now we're all going to hear about this until I write it.
Fantastic. I love it.
So Tara, you mentioned
I'm just like all of the at the end, all of these cult leaders and different characters are going to be like taking off their pseudo personalities. And the final song is going to be a song called Living With It. And I'm not even going to touch writing that until like I've casted the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I want a 16-person written song by all these cult babies. Because I think this is the answer. And I'll ask you the question, like, how are you doing it now? How are you? Are you okay? How did you get here?
Right.
And I think obviously, right, the answer is living with it. But like, how are you living with it? What does that look like for your family right now?
Well, I would say that I am in a lot of EMDR. I'm doing therapy. As a result of participating in the documentary, I was ostracized by my entire family. Which means that my autistic child, who only grew up with my family as like his best friends, lost his best friends, lost his grandma, lost his grandpa. And we lived directly next door to my family. And they let me know via email that they were no longer going to be having a relationship with me.
They could have literally yelled it from the porch, but they chose to email.
Yeah. And this was all the years I spent making sure this didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And I knew the day that we sat down to record, like when we left recording that day and like made it down the steps and like around the corner, I like lost the ability to stand. My knees gave out. And Floyd like grabbed me and what's wrong? And I was like, if my family ever see this, they won't love me anymore. And I knew it to the core of my being. And my family would say, "Oh yes, we love Tara, but we can't condone what she's doing. She's lying. She wasn't raised in a cult. She's
besmirching the Christian message."
Right. They have to choose Jesus over their daughter. And they feel like I made choices that, no longer supported Jesus. So that was a process of the most insane pain that I've ever been through in my life. And that's been about 1.5 years ago, and we've moved. And I call this house my house of peace because of the healing that is taking place here. And, my son we're finding our chosen family. My son is in high school now, public school. And, there's so much good that has come as a result of so much pain. Yeah. But we're still in a place of healing and growing.
And you mentioned the relational aspect of it, and we did an entire episode on the exit cost of leaving these cults, and you obviously have experienced it with your family. In a lot of respects, the most difficult part of my journey is figuring out how I feel about those relationships and navigating those relationships. And I haven't experienced what you folks have experienced, and your fortitude and your ability to navigate through all of that is amazing. But I would think that for a lot of people, and I know this from experience, just having conversations with people, that even when they are confronted with the lies of the group or the lies of the cult, they stay because of the relational cost in exiting. And has that been your experience?
I mean, yes. Yeah. I know that initially when Floyd, like I shared earlier, when Floyd told me where he was at, with using evolution as an example and being so scared that my family find out, I didn't ask the questions right away. I didn't start exploring it because I was just trying to play defense. I was trying to, protect Floyd to the best of my ability because I didn't feel like what he was doing was wrong. And I still knew that I needed to protect him, protect myself.
From your family.
From my family.
Yeah.
And I just, the cost is so high. The cost is so high. I paid the price to have freedom.
It's the craziest pain, I think, of mourning someone who is still alive.
Yeah.
And I think for some reason when they sit there and say, like, oh, we love you, right? Like,
Yes.
we threatened to sue you, but we love you. But like, but you don't.
Right. Right.
And
no,
it's just, it's so hard.
I remember feeling broken from a very young age because the way my childlike brain looked at Jesus in scripture, I translated his love to be unconditional.
Whoops.
Yeah. And then I tried to mirror that in my life and I would get in trouble for it. No. You cannot be accepting of this minority or of this group because that Jesus wouldn't have done that. This is how the Old Testament God would handle this situation. And we're going to sit back and we love them from afar. And I'm like, but that Jesus's love was active. He was in it. He was in the thick of it. It was relational. And I felt like there was something wrong with me my entire life because the way that I loved people was not the way that I saw it in the church or with my family. And it made me feel like I was the one that was broken.
Yeah. One of the lines that I really relate to from a Alanis Morissette song, so of course I'm stealing it and putting it in the musical, is we'll love you just the way you are if you're perfect.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to this at 14 years old, secret. I had a religious CD on top of the other CD.
Well, you were sneaky, girl.
Yeah, because you could do that finally in these Discmans. It was so exciting. And I remember being 14 and listening to this line and being like, oh, that's our life.
Yep.
And I think you all will appreciate that in the musical, it's this song called The Making of a Cult Baby. And it's going to be her growing up, being indoctrinated. But the whole time they're like, smile, click, the camera, perform. And then at the end of the song, she's going to stop performing for the camera. And then the Troubled Teen Institute is going to come.
There we go.
Away.
Yep.
And it's I always felt like that. And I am also autistic and ADHD, and maybe this is just the logic part of my brain, but I was just like, we say we love unconditionally, but we don't. Because we, as children, we're growing up knowing that we only get love if we're perfect.
Yes. Yes. And there was this moment after my family sent me the emails, and since we lived directly next door, this is a silly example, but it cut so deep. Since we lived next door to each other, my dad mowed my lawn. And the first time that my dad mowed the lawn, like, oh my God. It's so silly, but it was just such a...
And he went down the property line.
He went down the property line, and there was this line in between the 2 yards, and I sat there on my side of the grass, and I just looked at it, and I was like, this is what conditional love looks like. Like, there was no conversation. There was no talking about it. For the 1.5 years from us filming to the documentary airing, I would like very gently try to ask my parents, hey, can I tell you about what I did? And can I tell you about the experience? Do you guys have any questions? Nope.
We'll never watch it.
We're never going to watch it. We're never going to watch it because they were afraid to see what their evil daughter would have said. When I called my mom after filming for 8 hours, I called her and I was like, we just got done. I'm so excited. She was like, well, that was a really long time. Did they make you renounce Jesus?
Yeah, for 8 hours. That's all we did.
Yeah, it's going to be one heck of a documentary. Goodness gracious. So it just...
but that was the only question she ever asked you.
The only question she ever asked. And
there's also this trend in cult memoirs and cult story sharing that when the parents do read the book or listen to the thing, they're often surprised that it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be.
Yep.
Which leads me to flip that around and be like, so it was worse. There was worse things we could have said.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I remember in filming, they ask you so many questions. They covered so many, like, just topics upon topics upon topics. And they started to go political. And I was so just baby into my deconstruction. And I whispered, I was
3 states away.
A state away from where my family was. They were nowhere near me. And I was like, I think Democrats are good people. Like, I was petrified to say something that would put liberals in a positive light. And
in the category of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my parents, my mom, I said to her, because I had that realization that if they saw it, they wouldn't love me anymore. And I said to my mom, I was like, I was honest. I was like, I'm nervous for you to see it. And she took that like as an excuse to never talk about it and to never. But I just remember being like, the thing I was nervous about you hearing was that I thought Democrats could possibly be good people. It wasn't that I outed you as terrible parents. It wasn't that I renounced Christ. It was this very honest, trying to share this story. There was nothing bad or evil in what Floyd or I did.
Even if you slandered your parents, renounced Jesus, and signed up as a Democrat on camera, nothing... A point that I've made to her multiple times, how many serial killers or child murderers do we watch televised? And these
court cases,
thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. You see these people in court being accused of these heinous crimes. Directly behind them is their loving, supportive parents who often say, we're horrified by what's happened, but we love our child and we want justice.
Not when it comes to a cult.
Yeah.
Not when it comes to.
And the irony is, you mentioned that you told your parents about what you were doing, and then they said, "Well, we're never going to watch it anyway." So the irony is, if you would have never said anything about it, would the situation be any different? You know what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, they
would have been a little surprised. Technically, my mother watched it, and
that was the crazy thing.
I was going to be in it.
We had no idea that his mom was like, I guess that technologically savvy to be like aware of things happening, and we discussed it with his siblings, like, should we let your mom know? And everyone was like, nope, she's never going to come across this thing, never in a million years. And then there she was just watching the documentary, and there's her son on it, and she was so cool about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting to me? What's interesting is obviously I'm older than you guys are, but in my journey, I've been very vocal on social media, and my family, they just basically have decided, I think, to ignore it. Right. Every once in a while, if I post or write something, they'll come out of the woodwork and push back a little bit. But when we're in person, when we're together, I've made overtures. Let's talk about this. Let's discuss this.
Yep.
They don't want to.
They don't want to be challenged.
Right.
They don't want to have to set down their cognitive dissidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like they have to keep those beliefs have to be so, protected, because there could be that thread one day that pulls it all apart. It's an addiction to certainty, right? And it's an addiction to having the answers. It's an addiction. It's addiction. Like it so is, because I know I went through withdrawal. Yes.
Yeah. And it's also the addiction to feeling superior. I think that's the thing we need to be well into deconstruction to let ourselves admit.
Yeah.
But it's like, I realized that. I was like, well, I grew up being told we were the best. So then I went out chasing that for the rest of my life. I had to be the best. Otherwise, I was worthless.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is just a form of self-hate, right?
Yeah.
But,
wildly, yes.
Yeah, I like what you said about addiction to certainty, because that's the other thing we hear from a lot of cult survivors is it's so scary. It's so scary. I'm so afraid to make decisions. And one of the things I tell them is like, again, like the ultimate promise of every cult is you do things exactly our way and we give you perfection. Usually after some space travel. We're going to go to another planet somewhere and then we'll give you perfection. Right.
Yeah.
And I just tell people, I'm like, you're no more likely to have anything happen to you than you were before. Right. You're no more likely to live happily ever after than you were before. Actually, probably are more likely now.
But that is such a powerful point that I've been really mulling over recently is when you meet someone who's deconstructing from having been raised in it, you're meeting people who've never considered the fact that like there could be no heaven, there could be no hell. There are people who have not looked at their own mortality because it was all taken care of. I mean, that was
You're technically going to live forever.
Right. I didn't have my first existential crisis until the other side of like major deconstruction, because I was fine, right? I was, like he said,
you got the ticket.
I've got the golden ticket. I'm gonna, I'm better than everyone else. I've got it handled and figured out. And now I'm walking around like, oh, now I know why everyone's got anxiety. And we're walking around, okay, it's because we're on this mortal coil and we don't know what to do with ourselves.
I'm putting I got the golden ticket in the musical.
Love it.
One of my favorite anti-cult mantras is just there are many valid ways to live a life.
Yes.
And I think for me, that's part of like my living with it. It's just like you could do it this way. You could do it another way. And, we're also addicted to the idea that if our lives are good, it's because we made this one good choice, right? And like picked the right person or did this. And if we were on a different path, it would have been miserable.
Yes.
Instead of realizing like, no, it just would have been a whole different life.
Yeah.
And we'll never know that. But, when you're raised in the way that all of us were, and you're only given one way to be, it's so hard, I think, to just relax and live and let live. But once you do, life is awesome. You get to meet all kinds of people. You get to participate in all kinds of cool things and fun and happiness.
Yes. I've never met more accepting, loving individuals than on this side of a church building.
Yeah.
That resonates so much.
It blows me away. My son has found acceptance. I've found acceptance. I've found love. I have this chosen family. They have no reason to love me, and they love me unconditionally. Like that's what it was supposed to be with my family.
Yep.
Just out of curiosity, how did the documentary come about? How did you guys get involved with that?
So one of the benefits of COVID was I got to work from home for the first time in ever, really, which was really transformational for us and our relationship, getting to heal a lot of the damage that I had done. But one of the perks of that is my wife, who's addicted to certain types of television, will put something on, and
Lula Rich. Yes. I put Lula Rich on the documentary.
And I got sucked in.
Yep.
And we watched it, and it was great. And a little while after we watched it, she yelled I was working on the couch, and she yelled from the bedroom, said, "Oh my gosh, the people who made Lula Rich are going to do an IBLP documentary."
Yeah. They're going to do an IBLP documentary.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, and immediately Googled the production company, found their website, found a random email at the bottom of they're not that easy to get a hold of. But I just emailed this.
He was just like, I want to help.
Yeah.
I want
to. And I said, hey, I did this, this, and this. I was involved these years. If you need people to talk, I would love to talk. And then I kind of forgot about it. And
it was he emailed them and we totally just forgot about it. And then maybe a couple weeks later, he gets an email. They want to do an interview. We interviewed with them, and less than 3 weeks later, we filmed.
Yeah.
And it was, and the crazy,
bizarre.
Everyone who participated in that documentary, their stories are so much bigger than what the documentary was able to share. But like Floyd's involvement, he went to Russia for Gothard. He smuggled money into the country for Gothard. His brother was at Alert, which was their paramilitary organization. Like, there's just so many stories that would just blow people's mind that this was happening, just behind some shiny, happy faces.
Yeah. Technically, I didn't smuggle the money. I was a money mule.
I'm sorry, money mule. Let's get yes.
It was
don't worry. I forgot or didn't realize that I had been deported because of a cult several times as a child when I did my top secret clearance interview. So.
Oh my!
Nice.
Literally years later, I'm deconstructing, and my husband's like, "So,
yeah." That's always a fun feeling.
Criminal, I always say a big, huge thing that people miss because we get so tied up in a cult and is it a cult and what is it, is that cults are criminal enterprises. Like, that's what they are. At the end of the day, that's what they are. They're here for your labor, and traffickers are criminals.
Yes.
That being said, documentary, what are you all doing now? How do people find you? When does the book come out?
Well, we are on pretty much every platform as Advocate Average, and that is just a name that applies to so many things in our lives. But
love it.
The average things, we're here for the normal average things and finding the joy in it. And, on the other side of deconstruction, in our journey with our autistic son, there's so much beauty to be had in the average things. And it's important to advocate for those things for yourself. We are still in the process of healing from a lot of loss, and we are in the process of writing the book.
Nice.
Yes.
One of my favorite deconstruction quotes, my listeners have heard me say this a lot, is that we know we're healing when peace and tranquility no longer sounds like boredom.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you two are doing it.
Yes. That is how I feel about this home. Like, I walked through this house, and it just, what had to transpire, because remember, I lived directly next door to my family, and we had to make this decision, like, for our mental health, emotional health, we've got to leave now. I can't walk past them. I can't have my autistic son see, like, we had to leave. And the entire process happened in about 3 weeks. We made the decision. We found the house. We sold. It happened so, like, what's happening? If there is no God, what is this? It felt crazy. And so this house is just, I am so wildly grateful for it. And that what you just said so accurately describes the piece here.
Enthralled with that piece.
Yes.
Well, Tara and Floyd, thank you so much for sharing a portion of your story. I feel like we've just scratched the surface. Perhaps we can do this again in the future, but we encourage all of our listeners to find you on social media, to follow you. If you haven't watched the documentary, Happy Shiny People, do that. And what platform is that on again?
Shiny Happy People is on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
I believe it was the biggest debut ever on Amazon on Prime, because that's how many people related to your stories.
It's really convenient now when people are like, why are you so weird? I can just be like, go watch this documentary. It's so much easier than trying to explain it.
Yes.
Yeah, we could all benefit from that. That would be great.
That's the number one reason to write a book if you're a cult kid or a homeschool kid.
Nice.
So that, I literally, when I sign books to people in my military unit or from college or whatever, I'm like, I hope this finally explains why I'm so weird.
I love it. Tara and Floyd, thank you so much. And we appreciate you sharing a portion of your story. We invite everyone to go and check out that documentary because it was very helpful and inspirational to me. So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
It's been a blast.
And for Daniella, I want to encourage all of you to buy and read her book if you haven't done so already, Uncultured. It's a great book, as well as it's available in audio as well as also on as an ebook. So there's all kinds of ways to access it, and you can get a signed copy if you follow her on social media and hit the link. So that's a really, really cool thing. Yes.
Oh, and exciting. It's now on Spotify subscription. So if you pay for Spotify subscription, you can listen to Uncultured. Yay!
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. And so until next time, I'm Scot Loyd for Daniella Mestyanek Young. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America.